Historically, the measure of acceptable social norms and values has been based primarily on the experience of those who are members of the dominant culture, identified in broad terms as white, male, middle class, Christian. An additional impact of dominant culture is its belief that anyone who works hard, follows the rules, and strives to align with all things approved from this dominant culture viewpoint can and will be successful. From the observable manner in which marginalized populations interact with and are viewed by the dominant culture, a contrary viewpoint is more accurate. Research has supported the fact that these dominant culture values and norms, when used to guide research that determines what is normal and degree of worthiness, are flawed in their frame of reference when considered as valid measurement in application to the lived experience of marginalized groups. Su, Arredondo, and McDavis explored the impact of social psychological research focused on racial and linguistic minorities, and along with other researchers, proposed there are three models they deemed harmful in conceptualizing research conclusions when applied to the experiences involving members of marginalized populations: the inferiority or pathological model, the genetically deficient model, and the culturally deficient or deprived model. Each concept will be described briefly. The premise of the inferiority or pathological model proposes that on the evolutionary scale, minorities by nature are more primitive than whites. Consequently, that inferior status results in pathology. Literature has consistently written characters of color as inferior and supported the claims with respected writing. For instance, The Origin of the Species by Natural Selection in 1859 by Charles Darwin, in which he attributed intellectual superiority to whites and genetic inferiority to lower races. The pathology ascribed to in marginalized groups and the use of what's been called scientific racism to conceptualize pathology has been linked to white supremacist notions. Researchers, including the Pew Institute, published a study examining stereotypes that are still accepted by whites and that included surprising results. 20% of whites stated publicly they believe that African Americans are innately inferior in thinking ability to whites. 19% reported they think African Americans have thicker craniums. 23.5% believed African Americans have longer arms than whites. 50% believed blacks have achieved equality. And 30% believe that problems experienced by blacks reside within their own cultural group. Su goes on to question how many more whites feel the same, but responded cautiously so as not to be perceived negatively. It's important to note that much of the evidence on which these research findings was based is now known to have been fabricated. Still, G. Stanley Hall, a respected psychologist and former president of the American Psychological Association, in 1904 stated as fact that, quote, Africans, Indians, and Chinese were members of adolescent races and in a stage of incomplete development. Considered the father of child psychology, Hall was not immune to inheriting racial bias. The genetically deficient model asserts that racial and ethnic minorities are lacking in the genes and biology, the equality of which would make them equal to whites. The validity of proposing an inherited predisposition to intelligence or lack of intelligence defies what science knows of heredity. Heritability is a characteristic of a population, not a trait, and yet the belief persists and continues to describe people of color as being genetically deficient in various areas, including intelligence. Finally, the culturally deprived model suggests that a minority's unique culture resulted in minority problems. Well-meaning white social researchers actually deferred to this model in rebuttal to the genetically deficient models. Instead of the desired impact, the outcome was merely to replace biology and genetic inferiority theories with one linked to culture to explain what was still considered deviance. The ultimate message here was that racial and ethnic minorities did not have a deficiency as much as they failed to align with the right culture, also known as white culture.